Hello, greetings from the Delicious Legacy headquarters. A lab where we mix history with cooking in our bubbling cauldrons and add a ton of secret spices to produce the most authentically tasty episodes for your delight. Now, I've been feeling a little under the weather and I'm losing my voice, so I'll keep this intro short if I can. This is another special bonus episode which I released a year or so ago, specifically for Patreon backers. And now I decided to make it free for everyone here. I hope you'll enjoy the fascinating adventures of rice across Asia. Before I start, I would like to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for listening to the podcast. Remember to leave a rating or a review wherever you can, or a comment on any of the YouTube videos. The podcast is also there. Just search on YouTube Thomas Dinas or the Delicious Legacy podcast and you'll find it. I'm keen to listen your ideas or recipes or any suggestions for future episodes. Do get in touch. I'm on Twitter, of course, and Instagram as Delicious Legacy, and you can also email me at thedeliciouslegacypodcast@gmail.com. So the Delicious Legacy podcast, all one word. Now, let's get back to our episode. Rice is a very ancient food. People perhaps ate rice from 12,000 BCE as a wild seed together with nuts and acorns and other foraged stuff. Today, every third person on earth eats rice every day in one form or another. Rice is grown on about 250 million farms in 112 countries. It is the grain that has shaped the history, culture, diet and economy of billions of people of Asia. For these people, rice is equally important as breathing, sleeping and walking. It's a part of, everything. It's life itself. In the mythology of many Asian cultures, the rice spirit is female and often a mother figure. In Thailand, the rice goddess is Mai Posop and the Indonesian rice goddess Devi Sri are treated in similar ways, respectful and protective. In Chinese myth, there was a time that the ears of the rice plants were not filled. Observing that humans were near starvation, the goddess Guan Yin took pity on them. She went secretly to the rice fields and squeezed her breasts so that milk flowed into the ears of the plants. To complete her task, she pressed harder and a mixture of blood and milk flowed into the plants. This is the reason today we have both white and red rice. Equally as fascinating, and controversial too, is the whole who ate rice first. There is definitely a feud between India and China on who was the first to cultivate it, or first which ate it, or the first recipe is from one country or another. But anyway, today we will explore a rice dish that is massive and massively popular across the world, thanks to India, but it was introduced there in some sort of way from Persia by the Mughals, although again history is much more complex and complicated and diverse than that. Anyway, on with our episode and the history of biryani. Hello! This is the Delicious Legacy podcast. Welcome back to another archaeogastronomical adventure. With me, your host, Thomas Dinas. Coarse rice to eat, water to drink, my bended arm for a pillow. Therein is happiness. Wealth and rank attained through immoral means are nothing but drifting clouds. That was said allegedly by Confucius. For 7,000 years, rice has been cultivated and has been capturing the imagination of people across the globe. And it was a staple food, but also part of royal banquets in ancient India and China, which contest who started first the cultivation of rice, but also other ancient kingdoms across Southeast Asia. And so today we will concentrate in a particular dish and try and pinpoint its birth. Biryani. One of my favorite dishes that I learned to love and eat, obviously, after I left Greece and outside the familiar Greek food. Anyway, enjoy this lovely short bonus episode. Now, I've been pondering quite a long time for this episode. I was thinking about it and I was trying to find an angle. And on this short episode today about biryani, the dish, the Indian dish and its origins, we're gonna explore a little bit about the history of rice and some delicious recipes from across the huge Indian subcontinent and beyond. With a rather long and complicated history, it's been quite difficult to untangle the true origins of biryani, a dish so delicious and so complex that's hardly easy to make justice on a podcast. Rather, you should all come around and cook it over fire one fine summer evening. In a sense, biryani of the Middle Ages is a rice and meat dish, and these are layered in a pot with spices, and the pot is sealed with dough and is cooked over charcoal, over fire. So yeah, it has been around for a while. We're lucky to have references to something like it from ancient sources. From the Tamil, the Sangam literature, historically known as the poetry of the noble ones, connotes the ancient Tamil literature and is the earliest known literature of South India. The Tamil tradition and legends link it to three literary gatherings around Madurai and Kapatapuram, the capitals, the Pandyan capitals. The first over 4,400 years, the second over 3,700 years, and the third over 1,850 years before the start of the Common Era. Of course, this is a Tamil tradition-based chronology, and it has many historical and mythical elements in it. Historically, most scholars suggest that the Sangam literature era span from roughly around 300 BCE to 300 CE, which is the most acceptable range of the literature, because the Purana Nuru is the most important Tamil corpus of Sangam era courtly poems, and it has been a source of information on the political and social history of the ancient Tamil Nadu. And this provides a view of the Tamil society before large-scale Indian Aryan influences affected it. So according to Wikipedia, the Purana Nuru, which means the 400 poems in the genre of Puram, is a classical Tamil poetic work and traditionally the last of the 8 anthologies in the Sangam literature. It's a collection of 400 heroic poems about kings, wars and public life, of which 2 are lost and a few have survived into the modern ages in fragments. When the Chola king Nalan Kili captured the 7-layered fort held by Pandyan, Nalan Kili emblazoned the tiger symbol on the fort. After doing so, the soldiers were fed un soru, meat rice, in their camps. And there you go. This is the first reference on meat and rice, or later biryani, in ancient India. And there's another verse written by Kapilar after Velpari was killed by the treachery of Chera, Chola and Pandya kings. Parivel was a great giver like Karna and known to give to anyone that came to him. And after his death, Kapilar is lamenting that who will feed us un soru, made with goat meat and offer us liquor. So this dish un soru from the 1st century AD. It's the first references to something along the lines of meat and rice, something like biryani. To give a bit of context and background about Tamil, so the Tamil people are a linguistic group with roots in modern South India and Sri Lanka. And the traditional homeland of the Tamil people is called Tamil Nadu, Tamil is one of the oldest languages of the Indian subcontinent. Archaeological and written evidence suggests there were strong trade and economic links between the Tamil Nadu and even Mediterranean powers such as Rome. And Tamil Nadu is an important historical region for early Hinduism and Shiva worship, which was particularly prominent during the period of the three crowned kings. Shiva is known as the destroyer of the universe and is a Hindu god, for those of us who are not familiar with these concepts, and one of the trio of the Hindu pantheon along Brahma and Vishnu. Many ancient Tamil were part of the Shaivism sect of Hinduism, worshipping Shiva as their main god. Writers and poets composed the earliest surviving Tamil literature during that period, and Sangam writings were composed in the Tamil language and often featured poems written about royalty and love, with both men and women as primary characters. Some of the poems were also composed by women, so Sangam writings were supposedly created as the centers of learning in Madurai, part of the Pandya territory, and the Sangam period began in the 4th century BCE and ended in the 4th century CE. So these poems and writings are one of the oldest records of Tamil literature we have, and of the legends and of the language. And this is where we find the first references to these kings, Pandya, Chera and Chola, who rose and fell in conflict with each other. And we have this first tantalizing evidence about biryani recipes and food. Of course, what we shall see in this episode is other influences and other developments and ways of the dish was embellished and made more complicated and more regal in a way. There can be little doubt that biryani originated in Iran. Even the name biryani can be traced to the original Persian birinj biriyan, literally fried rice. In Iran, the deg, which is the pot, is put on dum, which is slow cooking, to allow the marinated meat to cook on its own juices, and perfectly layered with rice and aromatic substances, and the rice is gently fried. Some people will say that there's no evidence that biryani first came to India with the Mughals, and that it's far more probable that it travelled with pilgrims and soldier statesmen of noble descent to the Deccan region in South India. It was only much later that the dish meandered along less travelled roads along the seaboard and the hinterland of the peninsula, donning different local carbs to tickle regional palates. So what is the Mughal Empire? As we mentioned, this conventionally said to have been founded in 1526, so early 16th century, by Babur, a chieftain from what is today Uzbekistan, who employed aid from the neighborhood Safavid and Ottoman empires to defeat the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, in the First Battle of Panipat, and to sweep down the plains of North India. The Mughal imperial structure, however, is sometimes dated to 1600, to the rule of Babur's grandson, Akbar. This imperial structure lasted until 1720, until shortly after the death of the last major emperor, Aurangzeb, I hope I pronounced that right, during whose reign the empire also achieved its maximum geographical extent. Subsequently, it was reduced to the region in and around Old Delhi by 1760, and the empire was formally dissolved by the British Raj after the Indian Rebellion of 1857. Babur, who reigned 1526-1530, he was a Central Asian ruler, as we said, who was descended from the Turco-Mongol conqueror Timur, who in turn was the founder of the Timurid Empire from his father's side, and from Genghis Khan from his mother's side. He initially established himself in Kabul, modern-day Afghanistan of course, and then pushed steadily southward into India from Afghanistan through the Khyber Pass. Interesting, supposedly old Mughlai recipe from Shah Jahan's kitchen for paneer and green chickpea biryani sounds kinda quite contemporary and is similar to Bombay-style paneer and chickpea biryanis, except the paneer pieces aren't butter-fried and threaded on skewers in modern versions. Also, it's not too surprising that there were vegetarian biryanis back then. Some Mughlai emperors, including Shah Jahan, at some point in his life, ate vegetarian food on certain days of the week. So there was going to be some meat-free versions of regular dishes. As we said, one theory suggests that biryani was brought to India by the Mughals. who ruled over the Indian subcontinent. So according to this theory, the Mughals, known for their love of food, brought biryani to India from Persia. This theory is supported by the fact that the Mughals were great patrons of Persian cuisine and often incorporated Persian ingredients and cooking techniques in their food. Another theory suggests that biryani originated in South India, where it was known as un soru, or one-pot meal. According to this theory, biryani was a dish created by the Muslim rulers of the South Indian kingdoms. The dish was then adopted by the Mughals, who introduced it to North Indian cuisine. In the 16th century, the Portuguese traveller Duarte Barbosa wrote about rice dish prepared with meat, spices and saffron in India. This dish, which he called biryani, is believed to be an early version of biryani. While the exact origin of biryani remains a mystery, ample historical evidence suggests that it has been a part of Indian cuisine for centuries. Whether brought to India by the Mughals or originated in South India, biryani has a rich and fascinating history worth exploring. This history is dating back centuries, as we've seen. In ancient Indian texts, there are several references to rice dishes similar to biryani. One such dish is yavasa, which was mentioned in the Arthashastra, an ancient Indian treatise on statecraft and economics. Yavasa was a rice dish cooked with meat, spices and ghee. The influence of Mughal cuisine on biryani cannot be ignored. The Mughals, who ruled over India for centuries, brought a rich culinary tradition influenced by Persian and Central Asian cuisine. The Mughals introduced several ingredients and cooking techniques now integral to biryani. For example, saffron. It is used to give biryani its distinct yellow color and aroma, and was a favorite ingredient of the Mughals. The Mughals also introduced the use of yogurt, which is used to tenderize the meat and add a tangy flavor to the dish. They also introduced the dum, as we've seen earlier, the cooking technique which involves cooking rice and meat in a sealed pot over a low flame. The origins of the dish may be shrouded in mystery, but its influence on Indian cuisine is undeniable. The Mughals, in particular, played a significant role in shaping the modern-day biryani that we know and love. Today, this remains a beloved dish in India and beyond, a testament to its enduring popularity and delicious taste. It has changed over time, of course, reflecting people's changing tastes and preferences. Over time, as a dish became popular in different regions and cultures, it took on new flavors, spices and cooking techniques. One of the significant changes in biryani was the use of different meats. While traditionally biryani was made with mutton or chicken, today many variations are made with many different types of meat, such as beef, lamb or fish. Another significant change was the addition of vegetables, such as potatoes, carrots and peas, making it a complete meal on its own. Adding vegetables also helped to balance the dish flavors and add more nutrition. Modern variations of biryani include fusion biryanis, such as the Indo-Chinese biryani, which combines Indian and Chinese flavors, and biryani made with quinoa or other grains. Additionally, there are vegetarian and vegan versions using plant-based meat substitutes such as soy or paneer to replicate the taste and texture of meat. There are many legends associated with the evolution of biryani, one of the popular ones being the story related to Mumtaz Mahal, wife of Shah Jahan. It is believed that when Mumtaz visited the army barracks, she found that the Mughal soldiers looked undernourished. In order to provide a balanced diet to the soldiers, she asked the chefs to prepare a dish with meat and rice. The dish was whipped up with spices and saffron and cooked over a wood fire. Another legend states that biryani was brought to India by the Turk-Mongol conqueror Timur in the year 1398. True rice, Oryza sativa, has reigned supreme in South and East Asia for 5,000 years. Easily, the majority of annual world rice production is Asian. The consumption of rice there ranges from 100 to 200 kilos per person per year. Rice was not a cereal initially grown by the Chinese, because China's first centers of agriculture were in the north of the country, where despite the harsher climate, fields of wheat and millet were grown there for 6,000 years across the fertile muds of the river basins. The former dominance of millet over rice in Chinese civilization is shown by the naming of archaic measures of volume according to the amount of millet they contained. Rice was much more expensive than millet in the North China over a long period, and thus was an exotic luxury food. Rice growing began thousands of kilometers from Honan and Sichuan in the Yangtze Delta. Rice is not native to it in the true sense of the word, since it reached the marshes of the Yangtze from India, perhaps coming overland, carried by birds and winds, or by sea, with currents. Several species still grow in the local jungle and are true kinds of rice, although wild, and of course very different to the American wild rice, which is a different species basically. Archaeological evidence of a cultivated species that grew near Shanghai 3,000 years ago shows improvement of the wild strains after some 15 to 20 centuries of care and experimentation. So the Yangtze Delta, the deltas of Ganges in India and the Mekong in Vietnam, like Bengal and the Philippines and Java, are rich in endemic species of rice, and rice itself is venerated in the Hindu religion. There is an extraordinary diversity of varieties there. They can be counted in the thousands, and when other cultivated rices are taken into account, the result is a list of more than 80,000 different rices worldwide. All varieties in semi-maritime Southeast Asia are grown on flooded land, usually with archaic and old and traditional methods, which have hardly changed in the last few thousand years, such as the hoe or the rudimentary plough drawn by buffaloes or by women in some cases. More than once it happened to see a plough drawn by a woman while her husband walked behind and guided it. Pitiable it is to see the poor things sticking their little feet into the ground as they go and drawing them painfully out again, and so hopping from one end of the furrow to the other. One day we had the patience to wait a long while at the side of the road to watch whether the poor labouring wife who was drawing the plough was allowed from time to time to rest herself, and we saw with pleasure that there was a cessation of work at the end of each furrow. The husband and wife then sat down in pastoral fashion on a little hillock under the shade of a mulberry tree and refreshed themselves by smoking their pipes. This scene was described by Father Huck, a Lazarist French missionary in the middle of the 19th century. How did rice get to Western Europe from China? The Persians and Mesopotamians first encountered rice towards the 5th century BCE, as a result obviously of diplomatic and trading relations and contacts between Darius the Great and the Chinese and Indian states. Rice growing reached Egypt and Syria during the next 2 centuries, and Theophrastus, the spiritual heir of Aristotle, mentions orison as an exotic plant around 300 BCE. The great virtues of rice water in digestive disorders were of interest to the Greek doctor Dioscorides Pedanius in the 1st century of our common era. He praised the decoction of rice known as ptisana, and its benefits were allegedly confirmed by Horace, Pliny and Columella. Southern Spain owned its first rice fields to the Moors of Andalusia, as we've seen before, but Portugal for some reason did not follow in its neighbours' examples until the 15th century. Several attempts were made to grow rice in Italy in the early Middle Ages. At the end of the 13th century, the Visconti Dukes of Milan took a personal interest in the possibilities of rice growing. But it was their successors, Galeazzo Sforza and his brother Ludovico Moro, who brought rice to the Po Delta. And with it, prosperity and, of course, malaria, which plagued the agricultural labourers who had to live in these very wet and semi-aquatic environments. Rice has much the same symbolical and ritual significance as the other major cereals of wheat and maize. As a gift of heaven, it shows the care of God for mankind, and it is said to have grown of its own accord in ancient times, perpetually filling the granaries. While rice was inexhaustible, a golden age reigned. The difficulty of growing it now is generally felt to be a just punishment for human ingratitude or even presumption. And like bread in the Christian liturgy, rice is a ritual food in the Shinto religion, and during great ceremonies, the Emperor of Japan is said to share rice with the sun goddess. The sun and its light, which ripen the rice, make it symbolic of enlightenment and knowledge. The people of the East also associated it with the color red, the color of the life principle, the soul and the heart, denoting eternal youth through regeneration. The multitude of its grains symbolizes happiness and abundance, so handfuls of rice are thrown at weddings. In the Western world, this custom, initially adopted in America, was probably imitated from the example of Asian immigrants. The primordial gourd of the Thai mythology contained not only all human races and all sacred writings, but also, instead of seeds, all varieties of rice. According to historian Lizzie Collingham, the modern biryani developed in the royal kitchens of the Mughal Empire, 1526 to 1857, and is a mix of the native spicy rice dishes of India and the Persian pilaf. Another theory claims that the dish was prepared in India before the first Mughal emperor Babur conquered India. The 16th century Mughal text Ain-e-Akbari makes no distinction between biryanis and pilaf, or another word for pilaf is pulao. It states that the word biryani is of older usage in India. A similar theory, that biryani came to India with Timur's invasion, appears to be incorrect because there's no record of biryani having existed in his native land during that period. Others, like Pratibha Karan, believe that biryani is of Mughal origin too, derived from pilaf varieties brought to the Indian subcontinent by Arab traders. She speculates that pulao was an army dish in medieval India. Armies would prepare a one-pot dish of rice with whichever meat was available. Over time, the dish became biryani due to the different methods of cooking, with the distinction between pulao and biryani being arbitrary. The Mughal biryani has almonds, ginger, garlic, onions that you fry in oil, whole spices such as cinnamon, cardamom, cloves and peppercorns, coriander, cumin, and so on, yogurt, lime juice, coriander and mint leaves, and salt. Rice is first mentioned in Greek texts at the time of Alexander. Aristobulus described wet rice farming, and Megasthenes explains how rice was used as a staple food in Indian meals. Transplanted westwards, presumably by the Persians, rice was already a plentiful supply in Susiana, which is in western Iran, by the time of Alexander's death. After a further spread in the Hellenistic period, it was a familiar crop in the Babylonia region and Lower Syria by the 1st century BC. Not long afterwards, rice was being exported from India to Somalia. Rice was not a common staple food for ancient Greeks and Romans. Rice gruels and rice cakes are mentioned by medical authors, and Anthimus gives a recipe for a rice pudding much later on, made with goat's milk. Megasthenes was a Greek writer who wrote an account of India called Indica, an account of the Mauryan kingdom of India. Sadly, the original work is now lost, but its fragments have survived in later Greek and Latin works. So, reconstructing this text from the portions preserved by later writers, we get to know the economy of India, which produces every kind of metal suitable for adornment and military equipment. Apparently, no famines have ever occurred in India because of the following reasons. The Indians are always assured of at least one of the two seasonal crops, and in most years both crops succeed. A number of remarkably sweet fruits grow in the wild, and roots grow in marshy places. The food plants grow in abundance in plains because of water from many rivers. The Indian warriors regard those engaged in agriculture and animal husbandry as sacred. And then Megasthenes talks about the food and clothing and says Indian beverage is a liquor composed from rice instead of barley. And the Indians, when they eat at supper, a table is placed before each person, like a tripod. There is placed upon it golden bowls, into which they first put rice, boiled as one would boil barley, and then they add many dainties prepared according to Indian recipes. Indians never drink wine except in sacrifice. So this is one of the first descriptions of rice eating from the Europeans, from European perspective, in India. Thank you for listening. I've been Thomas Dinas, and this was the Delicious Legacy Podcast. Over and out.